And yesterday, Saints assistant general manager Jeff Ireland made the case for why it would be a good fit. He was on the Matt Mosley show on ESPN Central Texas Radio, and he said it's a compliment to Jameis Winston to understand where he's at in this world and sign a one-year deal here and learn behind Drew. Look, there's no better teacher. If Drew never said a word to him, he would observe more than he'll ever learn in football just by learning how Drew does things. And then you throw in offensive coordinator Pete Carmichael, quarterbacks coach Joe Lombardi, and Sean Payton on the offensive side of the ball, and those creative minds, Jameis Winston will learn more football in a year than he has in his lifetime. Graziano, let me quickly come back to you here. What options did Jameis have? I guess the question here is, Jameis was not looking at a situation where he was going to be the starter someplace else, unless there's something that I've missed in all of this. Tell us about how he arrived at this decision.
Well, the Saints come to him with an interesting opportunity, and they have a good example in Teddy Bridgewater, who was their backup quarterback the last 2 years and just got a starting job with the Carolina Panthers. And they can say to Jameis Winston, come in, sit behind Drew Brees, be a part of what we're doing here, be our insurance policy in case Brees gets hurt and we need someone to play like we did with Teddy last year. And a year from now, 2 years from now, you may be in a position where you're able to sell yourself to teams as a starter again. And obviously this was appealing to Jameis Winston in a market where there aren't a lot of obvious starting opportunities. The expectation is that they'll have a deal done very shortly to make him Drew Brees' backup for the 2020 season.
Okay, so it's all well and good that he can sell himself to other teams. But how about to what would be his own team? Ryan Clark, if I said to you, Jameis Winston can just slip into the starting role a year from now that Drew Brees will step out of, we assume, for a career in television or whatever the case is. He's going to be 42 years old at that point. And he is going to be, this is going to be the beginning of a new era for Winston, and it will be there in New Orleans. Do you buy it?
No, I don't buy it. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I can't see New Orleans being set on that right now, or Jameis Winston even feeling comfortable in that. But what he can do is learn from one of the all-time greats, learn from a guy who, for all intents and purposes, I've never heard a bad word uttered about this man from a teammate. So you go in, you learn from Drew Brees, you learn from Sean Payton. You take some of those things that are in their games and in their schemes, and you add them to what you do. And hopefully you show enough in practice, or maybe you get an opportunity to get on the field in stints that Drew Brees isn't playing and show that you can be the quarterback. But I can't see that being the plan for either one of these sides, whether it's Jameis Winston or Sean Payton and the Saints right now. But it could actually grow into that if Jameis Winston does the right things and progresses in the way that they want to see him do it.
Nick, tell me you're on my side.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it happening because I know that that Dan just mentioned that Teddy Bridgewater is a good example. You know who's a better example? Drew Brees. His numbers are almost identical to Jameis Winston, right down to the touchdown to interception ratio before Drew Brees joined Sean Payton down there in New Orleans. So I think that you could sell this to Jameis Winston, obviously, and I think that Jameis Winston potentially in that situation, maybe Sean Payton is such a great coach that he can make Jameis into the quarterback that we all think he is. And Jameis Winston is far more physically talented than Drew Brees ever was, without a history of injuries to his throwing arm. So I could see it happening. I wouldn't bet on the idea that standing next to Drew Brees suddenly makes you a better quarterback, but I'm sure it can't hurt, and he's more talented than anybody else.
What does the future look like as far as you're concerned, Graziano, for a guy, for New Orleans in general? Are you sold that Taysom Hill is the eventual heir to Brees? And if not, then why couldn't it be Jameis?
Yeah, I think what the Saints are looking at is multiple potential paths forward. They think that Taysom Hill could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But if Drew Brees had retired and they'd made Taysom Hill their starter this year, they would have had to change their offense. They would have been asking more of Taysom Hill as a quarterback and less of him as the hybrid running back, tight end, wide receiver they use him as. But with Brees coming back, they want to keep him in that role. They need someone who can step in for Brees, who's a more traditional passer. If Brees were to get hurt, they keep Taysom Hill where he is. So next year, depending on what Brees does, depending where they are with Jameis Winston, they could make a decision to make all those offensive changes and go with Hill, or they could keep him where he is and go with a more traditional starter, maybe Winston in that case. Couple of options still open for the Saints going forward.
Listen, I think if Winston does all the things we're talking about to sell himself to other franchises, it might make sense just to keep him with the one that he's been with. We'll see one way or the other. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.